For 49 years, the heavy wooden doors at the top of the stairs at Graceland remained locked to the world. Behind them lies the private sanctuary where the king drew his very last breath. Now, his granddaughter, Riley Keough, holds the keys her mother left behind. She is finally stepping across that forbidden threshold to shatter a lifelong family silence. What is the exact state of the bedroom today? Why has she chosen this exact moment to reveal what has been hidden in the shadows for nearly half a century? The secrets of the second floor are finally ready to be exposed. The sacred separation. A thick, dark velvet curtain hangs heavily at the top of the stairs, pooling on the carpet like a silent sentinel. Just beside it, a large gold-framed security mirror is angled perfectly to catch the reflection of anyone attempting to ascend. During Elvis Presley's life, this was the physical boundary of his world. It was a line drawn in the sand. Downstairs, the mansion was a bustling, chaotic carnival of laughter, music, and constant activity. But past this heavy drape lay a completely different universe. This was the fortress within the fortress. It was the only place on Earth where the most famous man alive could truly escape the crushing weight of his own icon status. To understand why these rooms remain so mysterious, one must understand how fiercely they were guarded while he was alive. The second floor of the mansion was not just a private area. It was a sacred, untouchable realm. His closest friends and employees, a group famously known as the Memphis Mafia, spent their entire lives living and working on the grounds. They ate his food, drove his cars, and protected his life. The Memphis Mafia was a hand-picked brotherhood. They lived to serve his every whim, from midnight motorcycle rides to cross-country flights on a moment's notice. They shared his triumphs and shielded him from the ravenous press. Yet, even for them, ascending these stairs without an express, personal invitation was strictly forbidden. Their loyalty had a strict physical boundary. The bottom steps of the grand staircase were a line that no amount of friendship could cross. To stand at the base of those steps was to stand before a royal court. You waited and listened. You did not look up unless you were summoned by name. Even his closest confidants felt a chill when they looked past the heavy drapes, knowing that the man they protected was utterly out of reach. To cross that line without permission was considered a betrayal of trust. It was an unwritten law that everyone respected. If the curtain was drawn, you did not pass. This strict separation was not born out of arrogance. It was born out of a desperate need for survival. Downstairs, he was the king. He had to be energetic, charismatic, and larger than life. He was a product that belonged to the public, but upstairs, behind the heavy wooden doors, he was simply a tired, fragile human being. In this sanctuary, he could take off the heavy, jewel-encrusted capes and drop the exhausting mask of fame. He could show his vulnerability, fears, and his mounting physical pain without the fear of judgment. The stairs represented a profound psychological divide. It was the difference between the performer and the man. As his isolation deepened in the late 1970s, the second floor became increasingly fortified. He began to fear for his safety and his privacy. He installed security systems and communication arrays designed to keep the outside world completely at bay. Among these installations was a highly whispered-about mechanism. Hidden deep within the master bedroom, right beneath the edge of his nightstand, sat a small, unmarked button. For years, rumors swirled among the staff about what would happen if that silent buzzer were ever pressed. Some believed it was connected to an alarm that would summon local authorities in the event of an assassination attempt. Others whispered that it was a direct line to a secret escape hatch, or perhaps an emergency lockdown system that would seal the entire second floor in steel shutters. The mystery of the silent button grew into a local legend within the gates of the estate. What was its true purpose? The reality was far more tragic than any high-tech conspiracy. The buzzer did not trigger alarms, and it did not lock down the mansion. Instead, it was a direct, silent lifeline. When pressed, it bypassed the main switchboard and rang a dedicated phone line in the home of his personal physician, Dr. George Nikopoulos. It was an emergency panic button. It was designed for the moments when his health took a sudden, terrifying turn. It was the quiet cry of a man who knew his body was failing him, living in constant fear that he would be unable to call for help before it was too late. On the afternoon of August 16, 1977, that buzzer remained silent. The lifeline was never reached, The tragic failure of that system only added to the heavy, solemn mythology of the second floor. When the public was finally allowed inside the gates of the mansion in 1982, the decision to keep the upstairs locked was immediate and non-negotiable. The family wanted to preserve what little dignity remained of his private life. They sealed the rooms, turning them into a quiet monument to his final hours. But what actually remains behind those doors today? Preserved in amber, the heavy wooden door groans as it finally swings open. Instantly, your senses are overwhelmed by a thick, heavy scent. It is a mixture of old paper, stagnant air, and the unmistakable lingering trace of custom-blended cologne. But it is the sudden, dramatic drop in temperature that truly takes your breath away. The air up here is freezing. The climate controls have been locked at a constant, icy level for decades. The temperature control system was installed to combat the humid Tennessee summers. It hums with a low, constant vibration that feels almost like a mechanical heartbeat. The thermostat is locked behind a protective cover, set to a freezing 60 degrees. This biting cold preserves the delicate fabrics and the aging paper of his library. This is not a mistake. It is a deliberate effort to prevent the fragile pieces of history from decaying into dust. As you step across the threshold, a chilling truth becomes painfully clear. This is not an exhibit. This is a physical time capsule. Everything in these rooms has remained completely untouched since the 16th of August, 1977. That was the tragic afternoon the world stopped spinning for millions of fans. For nearly 5 decades, the clock inside this sanctuary has been frozen. On the bedside nightstand, a book still sits exactly where he left it. It is a copy of A Scientific Search for the Face of Jesus. Next to it rests a simple, half-empty glass of water. Over the years, the water has long since evaporated, leaving only a thin, white ring of mineral dust on the bottom. Dust has settled over the years, but the physical arrangement is absolute. Even the record resting on the turntable remains in place. It is a vinyl demo of the latest gospel project by the Stamps Quartet, his beloved backup singers. It is a rare test pressing, its white label yellowed by decades of shadow. This was his private soundtrack, a quiet loop of sacred harmony that played as the world outside went mad. It was the last music he ever listened to. For a young Riley Keough, entering this space was a regular part of her childhood. She did not see it as a monument to a global superstar. To her, it was simply the place where her mother, Lisa Marie, went to feel close to her dad. Riley remembers walking hand in hand with her mother into the quiet chill of the bedroom. Lisa Marie would sit in the armchair, surrounded by the shadows of her father's belongings, and just breathe. It was a sacred, quiet routine that kept the memory of a father alive for a grieving daughter. But as Riley grew older, she began to hear the whispers. The world outside was filled with wild, sensational rumors about what was hidden behind those locked doors. This brings us to one of the most enduring mysteries of the second floor. For decades, rumors circulated among staff and obsessed fans about a private, highly secure vault built directly into the bedroom wall. Many believed this vault held secret, unreleased recordings worth millions. Others whispered that it contained untold wealth, gold bars, or perhaps even medical cover-ups that would rewrite history. What did Riley actually find when she finally unlocked that hidden wall safe? The truth, as it turned out, was far more emotional than anyone could have guessed. There were no gold bars inside the safe. There were no secret millions. Instead, when the heavy steel door was opened, Riley discovered a small, weathered collection of personal papers. Among them were intimate handwritten letters from a young Lisa Marie to her father. The letters were filled with the innocent, loving words of a little girl telling her daddy how much she missed him while he was away on tour. Beside these letters lay a collection of childhood drawings and small, cheap trinkets she had gifted him over the years. Elvis had kept them locked in his most secure, private safe. To the richest entertainer in the world, these simple pieces of paper were his most valuable treasures. They were far more precious than any golden record or jewel-encrusted jumpsuit. Finding them was a profoundly emotional moment for Riley. It shattered the myth of the eccentric, isolated superstar. It revealed a deeply loving father who clung desperately to the innocence of his daughter. It proved that in his final, darkest days, his mind was not on his fame, but on the family he adored. Now, as the sole guardian of this frozen sanctuary, Riley faces a heavy choice: How does she share this human side of her grandfather without turning his final resting place into a public spectacle? The pressure of carrying this secret history is immense. But as she looks around the dimly lit room, she knows that the silence must finally be broken. The isolation of the king. The silence up here is different. It is not the peaceful quiet of a sleepy home. It is a heavy, almost suffocating silence, specifically engineered to lock the world out. Downstairs, if you stand near the front windows of the mansion, you can still hear the faint, distant hum of traffic on the boulevard. You can hear the soft, muffled voices of the tourists taking photos outside the famous gates. But up here, the outside world ceases to exist. The walls are thick, padded with heavy fabrics, and the windows are permanently blacked out. They are sealed with heavy, dark drapes that completely prevent even a single ray of the bright Tennessee sun from piercing the gloom. For the man who ruled the music world, this was a necessary defense. But over time, this protective fortress transformed into a golden cage. To understand his final years, one must understand the bizarre, nocturnal existence he called daily life. He lived on what the staff referred to as Graceland time. It was a complete reversal of the natural world. While the rest of Memphis slept, he was wide awake. The pacing of his footsteps would echo softly on the thick plush carpets of his bedroom through the dead of night. He would wander the dark hallways of the second floor, a restless spirit seeking a peace that always seemed to elude him. To escape the heavy silence, he would occasionally rent out entire movie theaters or amusement parks in the middle of the night. He would ride his customized golf carts wild through the dark grounds of the estate, seeking some flash of adrenaline. But these escapes were always temporary. The night would inevitably end, and the dark stairs would call him back. He would ascend to the windowless master suite, where the thick velvet drapes shut out the morning sun. The absolute stillness of the room was both a shield and a cell. The silence was so deep that he could hear the ticking of his own watch, a constant reminder of passing time. When the sun began to rise, casting its first golden light over the estate, he would retreat further into the shadows. He would close the blackout curtains, lock the heavy wooden doors, and escape into a chemically induced sleep. This night owl lifestyle was not a mere eccentric habit. It was a defense mechanism against a world that constantly demanded a piece of his soul. Downstairs, the mansion was a vibrant, colorful wonderland. The jungle room was filled with exotic green carpets, hand-carved wood, and the laughter of his friends. The trophy room burst with golden records, glittering stage outfits, and the physical proof of his unmatched success. But that downstairs world belonged to Elvis Presley, the product. It belonged to the fans, the record labels, and the endless stream of hangers-on. The second floor, with its dark windowless atmosphere and heavy silent rooms, was the only place where he did not have to perform. Yet, this absolute isolation came at a devastating cost. The very walls built to protect him also cut him off from the vital, grounding realities of life. He became a prisoner of his own success. He could not walk down the street to buy a cup of coffee. He could not sit in a park or enjoy a quiet meal in a public restaurant. Every human interaction outside these walls was a carefully orchestrated security operation. Inside his room, surrounded by his books, records, and his mounting physical ailments, his world shrank. The vast, screaming stadiums of his concert tours were replaced by a single, chilly bedroom. The contrast was tragic. He was worshipped by millions, yet he spent his final nights completely alone in the dark. This brings us to a stunning discovery that Riley Keough made while cataloging her grandfather's personal desk. Tucked away inside a leather-bound writing blotter, hidden from the eyes of researchers and biographers for nearly 5 decades, lay a single sheet of personal stationery. It was not a piece of official business correspondence. It was a final handwritten note, scrawled in the king's own looping, erratic handwriting during his very last days. For years, historians have debated his final frame of mind. Was he spiraling into despair? Had he completely lost touch with reality? This hidden note holds the definitive, heartbreaking answer. It is a written message that completely redefines how we view his final hours. But what did he actually write on that lonely night? What was the final secret message he wanted to leave behind? We will reveal the exact emotional contents of that final note shortly. But first, we must understand how this highly guarded sanctuary survived the chaotic decades following his sudden departure. How did a family in deep, public grief protect a sacred room from a hungry public, desperate to catch a glimpse of the king's final resting place? The heirs of the sanctuary. A small, tarnished key of cold brass rests quietly in the palm of a hand. For nearly 50 years, this tiny object has held the weight of an entire family history. It did not belong to a museum curator or an estate lawyer. It belonged to the three women who loved him most. First, it was held by Priscilla, who used it to lock the door against a world that threatened to tear his memory apart. Then, it passed to Lisa Marie, who held it like a lifeline to a father she lost far too soon. Now, the key rests in the hands of Riley Keough. She is the final link in an unbroken chain of custody. But defending this sacred boundary from a curious world has been a long, exhausting war. To understand how this sanctuary remained intact, one must travel back to the chaotic years immediately following his death. By 1981, the estate was in a state of quiet panic. The king was gone, but the bills were mounting. The cost of maintaining the massive mansion, combined with staggering tax debts, threatened to completely bankrupt the family. The financial crisis of 1981 was a desperate race against time. The estate owed over $5 million in inheritance taxes and upkeep fees. The banks were closing in, and the family was on the verge of losing the keys to the castle forever. Priscilla Presley faced a terrifying choice. She could watch her daughter's birthright be sold off piece by piece to the highest bidder, or she could do the unthinkable. She could open the private gates of the estate to the public. Priscilla knew that selling off his personal cars and stage outfits would only delay the inevitable. She had to think bigger. She had to open the doors. It was a massive gamble, and many in the industry believed it would fail. When the plans for the public tours were finalized in 1982, the family drew a line in the sand. Priscilla was clear. The public could walk through the living room, marvel at the tropical beauty of the jungle room, and pay their respects at the meditation garden. But the stairs leading to the second floor were to remain completely unconditionally locked. There would be no exceptions, not for VIPs, wealthy donors, and not for the cameras. She stood firm against the advisors who wanted to sell VIP tickets to the private bedroom. She knew that some things were too sacred to be bought. She saved the estate by keeping its heart locked away. It was a decision born out of a deep desire to protect his dignity. The family refused to let the place where he spent his final, vulnerable hours be turned into a tourist attraction. As Lisa Marie grew into adulthood, her protective instinct over the second floor only intensified. To her, the upstairs was not a historical site. It was the only place left on Earth where she could feel the presence of her father without the noise of his fame. When she visited the mansion, she would bypass the crowds of tourists, climb the stairs, and lock the heavy wooden doors behind her. In those quiet hours, she was not the daughter of a global icon. She was simply a girl sitting in her father's room, surrounded by his things and seeking a peace that the outside world could never give her. Riley watched her mother carry this silent, heavy burden with absolute devotion. This intense security, however, only fueled the obsession of outsiders. Over the decades, the locked stairs became the ultimate challenge for the wealthy, the famous, and the deeply obsessed. This raises a fascinating, highly rumored question that has kept historians whispering for years. In almost 50 years of public tours, did anyone ever manage to penetrate this highly guarded boundary? Did anyone ever make it past the velvet curtain and the security guards? The truth is, many tried. But one specific incident has become legendary among the staff of the estate. During the height of the 90s, a world-famous multi-platinum musician arrived at the mansion for a private tour. This was a superstar who was used to getting whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted it. He believed his fame and his immense wealth made him immune to the rules of ordinary people. As the tour neared the base of the stairs, he quietly pulled a senior security guard aside. With a calm, confident smile, the musician opened a leather pouch. Inside was $50,000 in crisp cash bills. The offer was simple. He wanted just 5 minutes alone at the top of the stairs. He wanted to walk into the master bedroom and see the private sanctuary for himself. It was a life-changing amount of money for a security guard, offered in absolute secrecy. But the guard did not hesitate for a single second. He immediately rejected the money, radioed for backup, and escorted the superstar off the property. The musician was handed a permanent lifetime ban from entering the estate ever again. It was a powerful message to the entire world. The sanctuary of the king was not for sale at any price. When Lisa Marie tragically passed away, the heavy keys to this fortress were placed into the hands of Riley. She did not ask for this massive responsibility, but she accepted it with a quiet determination. She knew that she was not just protecting a physical set of rooms, she was protecting the final quiet truth of her family. But as the new sole guardian, she also realized that keeping the doors locked forever was causing a different kind of pain. The silence was allowing the rumors to grow wilder and more destructive. To heal the narrative, she would have to do the unthinkable. She would have to prepare herself to share the truth of what lay behind the door. The burden of the inheritance. A sudden, devastating silence fell over the historic estate on a cold January afternoon in 23. The news broke like a sudden clap of thunder, sending shockwaves around the globe. Lisa Marie Presley, the fierce keeper of her father's flame, was gone at only 54 years of age. For Riley Keough, the world did not just tilt, it shattered completely. She was suddenly left to explore a vast public ocean of grief. Only 3 years earlier, she had suffered the excruciating heartbreak of losing her beloved brother, Benjamin. Now, she had lost her mother. In the span of 1,000 days, the foundational pillars of her entire world had turned to ash. As if the emotional wreckage were not enough, a storm of high-stakes legal warfare quickly gathered on the horizon. The public watched in fascination as a quiet, bitter dispute erupted over the management of the family trust. Priscilla Presley filed a petition challenging the validity of a 16-year-old amendment that had appointed Riley as the sole trustee. The media seized on the filing immediately. They painted a dark, sensationalized portrait of a family divided. An ugly civil war waged over the glittering inheritance of the king. To the outside world, it was a soap opera of wealth, power, and betrayal. But to Riley, it was a private nightmare played out on a public stage. During the darkest days of the legal battle, when the noise of the press and the lawyers became too loud to bear, Riley would seek refuge in the one place the public could never reach. She would climb the quiet stairs of Graceland. She would sit in the deep, chilly stillness of her grandfather's bedroom. Surrounded by the frozen physical markers of her family's history, she sought a connection to the ancestors she had lost. In that quiet, frozen sanctuary, the legal briefs and the tabloid headlines faded away. There were no court dockets up here. There was only the gentle, heavy presence of a father who had loved his daughter, and a daughter who had loved her father. It was during one of these quiet, solitary retreats that Riley made a profound realization. She looked around the dimly lit room and realized that the fierce, defensive silence her family had maintained for 49 years was no longer protecting his memory. Instead, it was keeping them frozen. It was allowing the sensationalized rumors to grow, to fester, and to paint her grandfather as an eccentric, tragic monster. She realized that the only way to heal the narrative was to demystify it, to let the world see the fragile humanity of the man who had lived here. This brings us back to the mysterious note that Riley discovered tucked away inside her grandfather's personal desk. For decades, biographers had speculated about his final hours, whispering that he had descended into a dark, paranoid madness. Some claimed he had left behind a bitter manifesto, while others believed he had lost his mind entirely. But as Riley carefully unfolded the yellowed sheet of personal stationery, the erratic, looping handwriting revealed a truth that shattered those dark myths forever. The note was not a bitter manifesto. It was not a cry of desperate madness. Instead, it was a short, deeply intimate prayer scrawled on a lonely Memphis night. In the note, he spoke of his deep mounting physical exhaustion and the heavy burden of the crown he wore. But more than anything, he wrote about his little girl, Lisa Marie. He expressed a profound, aching fear that his wild, chaotic life would somehow hurt her or lead her astray. He wrote of his desire to protect her innocence, even as his own body was failing him. The closing lines of the note held a simple, heartbreaking request. He wrote that when the music faded and the stage lights finally went dark, he did not care if the world remembered him as a legendary performer or a wealthy icon. He only wanted his little girl to remember him as a good father. He wanted her to know that she was his greatest masterpiece. Finding those words, written in the quiet hours before his death, was a moment of profound emotional healing for Riley. It was the definitive proof that even in his darkest, most isolated moments, his heart belonged entirely to his family. With this truth in her hands, Riley knew she could no longer keep the sanctuary hidden in the shadows. The legal battles were resolved with a quiet, respectful settlement, leaving Riley as the sole trustee of the estate. But she was no longer just the defender of a physical set of rooms. She was now the guardian of a fragile, beautiful human truth. The time had come to throw open the drapes and let the light back into the darkness. The light in the darkness. A sudden, brilliant shaft of golden sunlight pierces the heavy gloom of the master suite. It is a simple, natural event. Yet up here, it feels like a quiet revolution. For the first time in nearly 50 years, the heavy dark velvet drapes are parted. The thick, stagnant cold of the room is slowly warmed by the gentle touch of the Tennessee sky. It is a moment of profound, symbolic transition. The heavy shroud of mystery that has hung over this room is finally beginning to lift. Riley Keough stands by the window, looking out over the sprawling green lawns of the estate. She has made her choice. She will not let her grandfather be remembered as a tragic ghost locked forever in a dark, frozen tomb. This brings us back to the core question that has kept the world captivated for 49 long years. Why did Riley choose this exact moment to shatter the family's lifelong silence and reveal the secrets of the second floor? Why now, after half a century of absolute, unyielding isolation? The answer lies in the deep, painful realization that Riley made during her darkest hours of grief. She understood that the absolute silence her family had maintained was no longer protecting his legacy. In fact, it was doing the exact opposite. By locking the world out, they had allowed a vacuum to form, and in that vacuum, the wild, sensationalized rumors of the outside world had grown unchecked. To the public, the second floor had become a place of dark, eccentric horror, a monument to a fallen idol's tragic descent into madness. But, to the family, it was simply the place where a beloved father and grandfather had lived, loved, and tried to find peace. Riley realized that keeping the doors locked forever was keeping her grandfather a prisoner of his own tragic ending. She knew that to truly heal the narrative, she had to demystify the space. She had to show the world that behind the heavy wooden doors and the gold-framed security mirrors, there was no monster, secret vaults of gold, and no bizarre conspiracies. There was only the quiet, preserved reality of a fragile human being. By sharing the deep emotional truths of these rooms, Riley is finally letting the light back in. She is replacing the sensationalized myths with a warm, beautiful, and deeply respectful reality. The physical rooms of the second floor will remain closed to the public footprint. The family will continue to preserve the delicate, aging artifacts from the physical wear and tear of millions of visitors. The book on the nightstand will remain where he left it. The record on the turntable will keep its silent vigil, but the emotional walls have been permanently dismantled. Through Riley's voice, the world has finally been allowed to cross the forbidden threshold. We have seen the letters of a little girl kept in his most secure safe. We have read the desperate, loving prayer of a father written on his final night. We have touched the quiet, human heart of the king. In doing so, Riley Keough has achieved something truly remarkable. She has transformed a place of tragic death into a sanctuary of living memory. She has reconciled the immense, crushing burden of his global fame with the gentle, quiet warmth of his humanity. As she quietly closes the door behind her, the heavy silence of the second floor no longer feels suffocating. It feels peaceful. The guard has changed, the secrets have been laid to rest, and after 49 years in the shadows, Elvis Presley is finally free. The crown of the king was a heavy golden burden that ultimately crushed the fragile man who wore it. But behind the locked wooden doors of Graceland, the darkness has finally been chased away by the healing light of truth. Riley Keough has not just preserved a quiet set of rooms, she has restored the dignity of her family. Now, the legend can finally rest, and the silence can finally be at peace.